I'm now happy to hand over to Dr. Steffen Beerbaum. He's the moderator of this next segment, and he's the head of the unit Application of Digitalization in Agriculture at the German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and has been working in different positions at the ministry since the year 2001. And please note, at the end of this session, we will have the opportunity to discuss some of your questions. And I would like to encourage you to hand in questions already throughout the discussion by using the chat function on your screen, and I think you should see it on the right side of your screen. So, Dr. Beerbaum, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome from Bonn from my side to all of you. We have, I think, more than 1,300 registrations. So I think this is probably the biggest conference on digitalization in the agricultural value chain on the EU level we have seen up to now. And why is this so? It is because we have so many outstanding speakers. And by setting the scene, we will start with a presentation from Professor Feind. He is Professor of Agriculture and Food Policy at the TER Institute at the Humboldt University in Berlin. He's holding a PhD in political science and is also an experienced facilitator and moderator in public policy dialogues. So his research addresses broad range of questions concerning agriculture and food policy, links to bioeconomy, environmental policy, sustainable transition, and the resilience of farming systems. Professor Feind is co-editor of the Journal of Environmental Policy and Planning, member of the board of the German Agricultural Research Alliance, as well as chair of the Scientific Advisory Council of Biodiversity and Genetic Resources at our ministry. So we are looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours, Mr. Feind.
Yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and good morning everyone from the city center of Berlin. What a better way to discuss the digitalization of farming than in a digital format. I want to share my slides, so to make it easier for you to follow. Is that working? It does. All right, so I've been asked to talk about challenges and opportunities of digitalization in the agricultural value chain from the governance perspective. The starting point is that digitalization means just the conversion of information into a digital, that means computer-readable format. On top of that, then digital network technologies enable remote cognition, communication, and cooperation. And digitalization then means the application of these technologies to economic, social, or organizational practices, as well as the processes that transform the affected practices, organizations, sectors, and communities. And as we have already heard in the previous statements, digitalization implies several converging technologies, in particular information processing and communication technologies, sensor technologies, robotics, GIS, GPS, and genomics. Now, there are brilliant visions of digital future, and we have already heard some of them this morning. And the promises of digitalization in the agricultural sector include environmental and climate solutions, transparency and traceability, more animal welfare, sustainable plant production, increased labor productivity, and more attractive jobs in agriculture for high-skilled labor. And there are also, we could call maybe alternative visions like spot farming, building on robotics and centered on the plant, or open source software, e.g. for community-supported agriculture. All of this, of course, emerges in a specific social economic context that we could characterize as digital capitalism. This has several characteristics. First of all, we have digital technologies that enable transnational value and production chains. Second, the digital networks on which these technologies work are in private ownership. Third, these technologies allow the proliferation of a management style that is organized around digital networks and digital data. This then transforms the nature of labor with an increasing share of cognitive, communicative, and cooperative labor, which is mostly mediated through digital technologies. And finally, this type of labor is then converted into new products and services. If this is the broader picture, then at a very abstract level, we could observe that there are four very transformative dimensions of digitalization. Digitalization creates new ontologies, that means novel objects, new epistemologies, that means novel ways of knowing, new practices, that means novel ways of doing, and new relations, which means novel ways of connecting and interacting. So taken together, this amounts to fundamental transformation of the social and material world in which we are right in the middle. And it includes shifts in the locus of authority and control. And this is at the center of the governance challenges that we need to face and address. So what are the building blocks of digitalization? Again, at a rather abstract level. First of all, the collection and digitization of information, building on analytical methods, for example, digital genomics, on sensors and imaging technologies, on remote sensing, GIS and GPS, and not least on the analysis of the search and other behaviors of digital users at the interfaces of these systems. These data are then fed and pooled in connected data management systems that perform the functions of data storage, data analysis, and database learning, which allow for user-oriented data management, for enterprise resource planning systems like business intelligence software and financial controlling. But we can also use these pooled data for data mining or artificial intelligence and machine learning. And on this basis, then new uses, products, and services are created. So in particular, new possibilities for remote work and control systems, but also for automatization of routine process. For example, in our area, the handling of plants, animals, and products, but also many visual monitoring activities can be automated based on machine learning technologies. The second area is digital communication, either many-to-many or one-to-many or many-to-one. So here we can think about farmer-to-farmer networks or farmer-to-consumer networks or new digital trading platforms for farm products and inputs. Furthermore, there's a whole range of new services around transparency, monitoring, and surveillance systems. For example, product traceability systems, employee administration software, or problem detection applications, for example, for disease detection or the prediction of deviant behaviors, which then can, of course, raise all sorts of ethical issues. There are also increasing links to financial services, for example, digital credit rating, which is linked to performance and compliance data, or new insurance services, for example, building on new climate risk insurance models, which require large sets of data. And finally, there's a whole range of new learning and advice systems, for example, online expert systems, benchmarking services, or advice, which is based on machine learning. Now, this creates all sorts of opportunities in agriculture, which are already emerging. First of all, in the area of plant production, the increasing use of remote sensing data, the development of new plant production systems that combine autonomous machines, small robots, and sensor technology, both on the ground and through drones, or new applications in genomics, proteomics, or phenotypization. In the area of animal husbandry, there's a whole range of new applications, for example, for the management of individual animals, for example, sensory technology for fertility monitoring, or the camera-based diagnosis of lameness, aggressive behavior, or weight. There are also approaches to develop completely new animal husbandry systems, for example, mobile poultry production. There are opportunities for emission management and reduction. And of course, then the suppliers, the husbandry people, they want integrated solutions, which is a new demand. Regarding food, of course, traceability systems for food authenticity, safety, and quality are important. based on things like QR codes or blockchain technology. There are possible applications to reduce food waste, and there are possibilities for the digital monitoring of diseases with a view to a One Health concept where we can trace diseases across plants, animals, and humans. There are also opportunities for regulatory monitoring. For example, a spatial risk assessment based on georeference data, opportunities for more integrated regulatory monitoring, or also new areas of monitoring that have so far been cumbersome because of the lack of data. And we could also think about open data management. For example, there's currently a discussion about the EFSA data warehouse because it's not quite clear how the data ownership works. There are developments around national data platforms and around national and European research data infrastructures. Now, what are the governance challenges in the face of these developments and opportunities? First of all, well, we have to prepare the preconditions so that people have general access and also the competences to participate in this digital economy. This starts with the digital infrastructure. Particular internet in rural areas is not always great. People need skills training, and I think we also need a general data literacy in the population. We can then look at the value chain level. So first of all, if we look at connected data management systems, there are issues around market power. First of all, we know very well about first mover advantages. Those companies that build up the first networks, they often are always one step ahead. This has network effects. The larger the network, the larger the benefits for users to use that network and not the competitor, which then can create data monopolies. There are also issues around data ownership and the participation of the data providers in the added value that is then created with the services and products built on top of those data. And the question then in the farm sector is whether, for example, farmers' corporations can build countervailing power, maybe in connection with the state. The second big point is, of course, vertically integrated data management, in particular in combination with artificial intelligence, since there is already the possibility or the scenario of a remote control production, which is controlled by the retailers and processors. There's also a scenario of vertical integration from the seed sector through the combination of genomics, the agronomic data that show the value added from new genome editing, and the patents that then allow to control the intellectual property. Further, at the value chain level, there are issues with the digital service providers and market power. These service providers are often new players in agriculture. The farms then buy in knowledge, software, and cloud services, usually through subscriptions. And also the farm hardware, the machines, the vehicles, the stable operations increasingly depend on software. The providers guarantee the software updates only for a limited time horizon. So there is designed obsolescence within these systems. That can also create lock-in effects for farmers once they have entered the universe of one manufacturer. So there is a possibility of an increasing dependence and a potential for exploitation of market power by the providers of these services. If we look at the platform level, then we can already observe some platform effects on diversity. So, for example, digital platforms include only specific crops or specific varieties and products. Also, digital support for farmers is usually provided only for selected crops, varieties, and products. That means that the economics of the information availability shapes the choice architecture. So the cheap information upfront nudges farmers towards certain featured products, which then can have structural effects. There are also further effects on structural change. These technologies require a high amount of capital. Many applications work only for large patches, and there is a homogenization push, for example, through the algorithms which are used, and that might not fit every farm type to the same degree. So we might also ask whether we need to make special efforts to maintain the space for alternative niche segments. For example, something like traditional digital free agriculture or e-commerce opportunities for regional specialties. Importantly, at the network level, of course, is the market power of the network providers. And here, the number of very powerful new players are now arriving in the agricultural sector. Think about Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Bosch, or Alibaba. So what we are observing here is a new struggle for control over the global food system. And we also see an asymmetry in the digital capacities and skills between these enormous private players and the public sector, which is really lagging behind. And if you also look at the location of these companies, then we can expect a very messy interplay of these private struggles for market power with more political, geopolitical struggles for global power in a competitive international system. What we also observe is something like a runaway private governance. So if you, for example, look at the Global Food Safety Initiative, this assembles about the 400 largest companies in retail and food processing. The access for small and medium enterprises is a little bit questionable here. And once these players agree on certain standards and protocols, then it will become very difficult for public governance to come up with different systems. So these initiatives have strong effects on the policy design space for public governance. And finally, there are sustainability issues. There's very little discussion of the energy use of these networks or on sustainable data management. And so at the moment, there is mostly a lack of standards and transparency. We should also consider that digitalization affects the identities and social relations on farms very fundamentally. So one example from animal husbandry, here was a recent media report about a farmer where the production system on the farm is now completely transparent for the veterinarian and the bank. So there is a shift from personal trust, where the farmer meets with the banker and the vet, to institutionalized trust, and the institutionalization is through the algorithms and the real-time data of the digitalized systems. So the farmer then perceived the loss of control, and probably an actual loss of control, which is in a tension with the entrepreneurial identity of an independent farmer. Then automatization has the benefit of relieving farmers of simple tasks, particularly on field, but research shows that many farmers see these activities as part of their identity that helps them, for example, to connect to the soil and to nature. So here is a perceived alienation from the nature part of the farm profession. And this could also have effects on the societal valorization of agricultural products. If the economic value added shifts away from the growing on the field to the digital data, then the valorization might also shift away from the living component of the product or the service experienced by the public. Of course, digitalization affects labor relations and labor conditions. In particular here, important are the surveillance and productivity monitoring systems. So, for example, one research project, which is also funded by the German government, includes the surveillance of tractor drivers through sensors. That's meant to be a safety issue, but it also, of course, intrudes into the privacy of the tractor driver. We have applications where farmers use benchmarking for the use of machines. The effect is that the drivers now work through the rest time with the ensuing loss of social time and interaction. In the area of seasonal harvest workers, one current example is that the administrative software that manages the wage payments is coupled with the sensor on the asparagus cutter, and if the machine doesn't move, the wage is deducted automatically. So what workers experience here is a loss of autonomy and a feeling of alienation and objectification, and as they term it, the feeling is Big Brother is watching you. So what we are going through here is a renegotiation of the implicit work contract, which is part of a broader social contract that is affected by these technological innovations. A huge governance challenge is what we could call the transparency dilemma. We have already discussed the tension between employee transparency versus autonomy and privacy of the employed workers. There are tensions between transparencies of business and value chains, and on the other hand, many organizations want to maintain their business secrets. If we have private sector transparency systems, we could easily link them to public monitoring, to public reward and sanctioning systems. But that is, of course, very disputed and not liked by everyone in the value chain. And if you look at areas like personalized nutrition, there will soon be demands by health insurers and the medical sector to get access to those very personal data. So what would be the right governance architecture? Here are also enormous challenges. Privacy, surveillance, data security, and also cybersecurity issues directly affect the personal and potentially the public security. This is traditionally the domain of the nation state, but in Europe we've got a single market. So what's the role here of EU regulation? If we have transnational value chains, we need international cooperation and coordination. What would be the legal basis for this? What is the role of international institutions? Where are the initiatives from organizations like the FAO and the WTO? If you look specifically at the data use and data transfer in transnational value chains, then of course there are demands for international harmonization. What we are seeing is usually an interplay of public and private standards in such value chain standards. Often these are private systems which also privatize the modes of conflict resolution. So what is needed here is a kind of meta-governance to ensure that these private conflict resolution systems are fair and open. There are all sorts of questions around access to data, access to market platforms, to products and services. So this raises issues around market power and competition policy. And again, the question is, where is this organized? Okay, we have that at European level, which is good, but what about international market power and competition policy? And finally, a big challenge is the limited digital capacity of the state. So we could ask, do we have an early warning system to identify and address problematic developments linked to digitalization? And the final point is democracy. How do we decide what we want from digitalization? If you, for example, look at the whole issue about public and private surveillance, there is an ongoing discussion here. What is desirable and what is undesirable? What is acceptable and unacceptable for different parties? This ongoing societal negotiation needs appropriate fora and arenas. But where are these emerging? I think we're not quite clear where these negotiations and these discussions should take place. The second important area is that with the use of algorithms, there is a use of an implied rationality. And that rationality is implicitly or explicitly normative. But it cannot replace public deliberation and public reason. And the question is, who decides about the rationality, the value judgments that are applied through these algorithms? That's a very messy area. The value of data is linked to questions of data ownership, data access, and the remuneration for the use of data. What is fair here? What works? And in which arenas is this being decided? And finally, I think here's a key role of science. Science needs to support societal reflexivity on these developments. As scientists, we need to come together across disciplines and with practitioners in an inter- and transdisciplinary effort to develop images of the future and to explore the preconditions and implications of these possible futures. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the conference and to the discussion.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think you really set the scene by giving us a broad picture on all different aspects of digitalization one can think about. So thank you very much again for this. Now we will move from Berlin directly to Brussels, the European capital, directly into the EU Commission. And there, Kerstin Rosenow is waiting to give her presentation. Kerstin Rosenow is head of the unit Research and Innovation in DG Agri, where she is responsible for programming, managing, and monitoring research on agriculture, forests, and rural areas. The digital transformation of agriculture and rural areas forms a central element of the work of her unit including the development and implementation of Horizon 2020, themes boosting precision farming and EIP agri initiatives on digital skills. Previously, she was working at the EC Research Executive Agency, managing the implementation of the project portfolio for Horizon 2020 Societal Challenge 2. And that is about food security, sustainable agriculture and forestry, marine, maritime, and inland water research. She has been working for the EC for over 17 years, and as described, she has a broad knowledge in science as well as in administration in the EU. She has studied law, politics, and administration, and we are looking forward to your presentation. The digital floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Steffen Beerbaum. It's great to be here with you and quite exciting to speak to 1,300 participants. So this is, as you said, quite an achievement to get together all of those being here. And it's a pleasure to address you this morning. So what I will do is indeed from Professor Fine's great general perspective, zooming in a bit on what are the EU level initiatives and policies. So concerning digitization in the agricultural value chain. So the first thing I wanted to mention with this regard is that digitization is really high on the European Commission's agenda and well reflected in the headline ambition of the Digital Age communication, which really means that this transcends into everything that we do at European level, not only agriculture, all the other areas as well, but it's really important. And the other big, let's say, policy strategy and theme that you all know of is the European Green Deal and the very many areas from climate laws and the strategies from biodiversity, farm to fork as most relevant for the agriculture sector, but also forestry strategies. And all of the very ambitious targets that we set in there, they will remain only declamatory if we do not address them through digital action and through a digitalization which really creates an enabling environment and uptake if we talk about here for the farming sector. So this is a bit setting the policy scene and the wider perspective of what we do at European level. Then, of course, the common agriculture policy and the future common agriculture policy is central to what we do. So there, the potential of digital technologies to enable farmers to contribute to sustainability ambitions and increase the competitiveness of the sector is also reflected in the future CAP post-2020. And digitalization, as you probably know, is a key element of the so-called cross-cutting or horizontal objective of modernizing the sector. We have the 9 specific objectives that you see here, but transcending all is the cross-cutting objective. And modernization of agricultural sector is intended to be fostered by the sharing of knowledge and innovation and the digitalization and encouraging the uptake. So we know that digitalization of the agricultural sector is instrumental not only to strengthen the competitiveness of the sector, but also to contribute significantly to several sustainability-related policy objectives. And this includes, of course, environmental and socio-economic sustainability. Digitalization was also helped to make the sector more resilient against crisis. So we have already heard on quite substantially opportunities that the digitalization can bring. But when we zoom in on a European perspective, this is really what we focus on. So digital technologies can transform agriculture by helping farmers to work more precisely, efficiently, and sustainably. It can make the job much more attractive to younger generations. You know, we have a problem of generational renewal, and digitalization is key for actually finding solutions here. Digital technologies also have the potential to offer consumers greater transparency as how their food is produced. And they can add value to all types of farming. This is really important for us when we talk about the public sector. So it's organic farmers as well as conventional farming. It's large farms, but also small farms. So there is a bit also the principle, so nobody being left behind. Moreover, the uptake of new technologies can bring benefits to all stakeholders, not only farmers, national administrations, all citizens, and finally EU policymakers can benefit. So it will be possible to assist farmers, for instance, in complying with the Common Agriculture Policy and the many rules, and consequently avoiding penalties, and also helping the reduce of costs for the administration. So the conference rightly calls the attention not only to the opportunities of digitalization, but also of the challenges and the role of science in the sustainable digital transformation of the sector. And that's, of course, where we and my team work a lot in. To set the scene for the exchange of this conference, I would like to point to the gap between digital technologies developed in research and innovation projects and offered on the market, and then the actual uptake of the digital technologies by farmers. So taking a European perspective again, to harvest the potential of digitalization in agriculture, we need to create an environment enabling farmers, including small and less change-oriented ones, to take up and to make efficient use of the digital technologies. So many factors contribute to such, but the ones that we concentrate on and that we further develop are essentially the access to broadband and other digital and data infrastructure, because if that doesn't exist, it's very difficult to digitize in rural areas, tailored investment support, tailored advisory service, that's key. So the farmer on the field has a trusted advisor, be it a private one or a public one, but there it's important that the advisors are also aware of the technologies and the different possibilities, but also the challenges provided, and that's a key central element we focus on. A functioning overall agricultural knowledge and innovation system that includes all the actors, be it the chambers, be it the advisors, be it the farmers, be it the researchers, that all work together to foster the uptake, the creation of trust in data sharing, facilitating the access to public data, tailored research and innovation actions. Tailored and research and innovation in digital and data technologies are crucial to drive the digital transformation of the sector. And here startups, SMEs, as well as the scientific community, they're really key to bring digital solutions for the sector and cost-effective ones in particular to the market and the end user. So now to focus in a little bit, at what we are already doing at the moment at EU level. So we are actually funding actions, boosting innovation in the digitalization of agriculture that are already making an impact. So what I am going to do now is to show you a little bit what we do in the area of research and innovation, and then what we do in the area of under the cap. So the first example here, I wanted to name only 3 projects that we fund under research and innovation programs Horizon 2020. So I would invite you to look at the results of the large-scale projects Internet of Food and Farm, Demeter and Atlas. These projects are jointly accompanied by the specialists in the Director General Connect and DG Agriculture and Rural Development. It's important that we work very closely together across departments also to make sure that we get the best results. So common to these 3 pilots is that the innovation projects involve 30 to 60 partners involving practitioners, science, IT communities, following a supply-demand approach and bringing end users and service providers together. They focus on open platforms and standards-based solutions for handling data used for digital applications in agriculture, and they follow a holistic value chain approach, which is also part of this conference. The use cases in these projects deliver evidence of the impacts of the solutions developed. So, and here I only want to mention one use case, so just to illustrate a little bit. This is within the project Internet of Food and Farm that concentrates on crop management and the added value of the tailored use of weeding data. The innovative approach developed leads to an increase in production and revenue and reduces working time through the tailored use of data and the innovative apps. I would invite you to explore the other inspiring use cases of these pilot projects, so the links will be provided at the end of the presentation. So a special feature of these pilot projects is their demonstration power. Innovative technologies and approaches are tested really under real life and real production conditions involving practitioners and the development of business models for farmers and agri-tech companies. They have a strong end-user orientation. These are essential features, in our view, to facilitate the uptake of innovation by farmers. Farmers have to see that novel approaches deliver added value to their work and are handy, and maybe if the neighbor does it and it's successful, so it will be also more prone to apply it on the own farm. Another relevant policy instrument already delivering on innovation a lot is the European Innovation Partnership for Agricultural Productivity and Sustainability, the EIP Agri. It was launched in 2012. So the idea was to say, okay, we foster with Horizon and the different framework research program so much research and innovation, but a lot of it sits on the shelf or in the laboratory and it actually doesn't get out there. What can we do to make sure that we get some of the results better to the ground and also get real needs and challenges on the field in the daily work of the farmer and the foresters more closely to the European research world? So there were actually 5 of these innovation partnerships created, and the only one still alive is the EIP Agri. And this is also thanks to the support provided under rural development programming and also funding, of course. And the key criterion of the EIP and the project that you can do thereunder is that the farmer must be the integral part and the researchers working together on the ground, on the field. Today, we have about 2,000 so-called operational groups that are developing innovative solutions following a bottom-up approach and involving multiple stakeholders on the ground, getting the ideas again up to European level and giving us munition to do further work in research and innovation under Horizon. So if we take stock, many projects and network activities have been carried out within the framework of the EIP Agri, and many operational groups, around 10%, develop, for instance, precision farming and other digital approaches. And overall, I think it's important that really these activities have led to a significant increase in practice-oriented knowledge and tailored communication. And it's also important sometimes, maybe we find a super digital ways for preventive technique on an olive farm working to find solution against Xylella, an olive pest in Puglia. But many of these solutions could also be valid in the Rhine Valley or on Corsica when dealing with wines and so on. So it's also important that if we work at EU level, that we share what is happening and that others in other areas are aware of what we're doing. And that's actually key. Ladies and gentlemen, knowing that many members of the research and agri-tech and EIP communities are actually among the participants of this conference, I would like to also use this opportunity to thank the projects for the work and their contribution to informed policymaking. For me and my team, it's really a pleasure to accompany Horizon 2020 projects and to hear on a day-to-day basis on lessons learned, gained also with EIP operational groups, and see all the innovative approaches that are developed. Results generated by Horizon 2020 and the EIP Agri projects have also been taken into consideration in developing the European Commission proposals for the post-2020 period. And here we go. So we've talked about what we currently do, but now it's time to look a little bit, okay, what do we do in the post-2020 period? Digitalization, research and innovation in agriculture will play a pivotal role in several EU programs. As the time for the presentation is limited, I can only provide you a little flavor of and maybe raise your interest in selected relevant policy instruments, concentrating on measures in the forthcoming Common Agricultural Policy, Horizon Europe, and the Digital Europe program. So what I wanted to mention first is in relation to the future CAP and under the future rural development policies in particular. So they will really promote the establishment of an environment enabling farmers to take up and deploy digital technologies. Under the new CAP, we will support both investment in the broadband infrastructure in rural areas, the improvement of the digital competencies, which is key, of the rural population at large. This is essential in order to unlock the potential of digitalization. The Future CAP will support investment and innovative projects on technological developments and digitalization. It will also increase the focus on digital solutions as a means to increase the ambitions to achieve the ambitious Green Deal targets. Investment support for the emerging sectors of precision farming, bioeconomy, low carbon sector, automation, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, drones, you name it, make most out of the innovation that is particularly relevant in this context. Also, the support to the EIP Agri that I have just presented will be upgraded with more direct support opportunities, reinforced network opportunities, as well as the fostering of cross-border cooperation. In addition, in order to build or roll out the agricultural knowledge and innovation systems in each member state or region, reinforced support will be available for tailored advisory services that are key, which I mentioned before, innovation support service, including training and better integration and networking opportunities for all sectors. So now coming to the more key science-based opportunities. Under Horizon Europe, so the post-2020 research program, of special importance for the field of the digital transformation of agriculture and rural areas are two topical clusters. The first one, the cluster food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture and the environment, and the cluster 4, digital industry and space. So under these two, we work together to find the best digital solutions for agriculture of the future. Under Horizon Europe, under the cluster that we are mainly responsible for, there are 7 intervention areas, and the one on agriculture, forestry, and rural areas is the one most directly addressing the challenges that we have, and many of those also regarding digitalization. So you know that the, let's say, funding negotiations, the multi-annual financial framework negotiations are still going on. But whatever happens, for the moment, we have around 9 billion euros that should be devoted to cluster 6. So the Commission proposal had been at 10 billion euros. But this is a significant increase compared to the past, so where we can focus on the future. And that is certainly good news. So overall, under the Horizon Europe program, there's a portfolio of instruments that will be available in the field of digitalization and data technologies in agriculture. So the first work programs are still under preparation and not public yet. However, I can already give some insights. While we have a number of large-scale projects on digitalization in agriculture under Horizon 2020, as presented here already, which already deliver on digital solutions under Horizon Europe, there will be many targeted themes, well supplementing Horizon 2020 results. We've done a good gap analysis, and we really want to focus on what's missing now. For instance, themes are conceptualized to help to address some of the challenges which go along with the digital transition in agriculture. To name only 3 challenges, there is the challenge that we still face to monitor and benchmark the performance of digital technologies regarding, for example, quantified environmental and economic benefits. There's also a lack of data and the uptake of digital technologies in the agricultural sector and the reasons for it. We need to take action also that the digital divide between regions and types of farms is avoided. For publicly funded research and innovation, for instance, the need of small farms in the application of digital technologies is really needs to be addressed. Research and innovation actions can also help to prepare rural communities for changes in employment structures resulting from the digital transformation, and to make effective use of digital technologies. Here it's really important that research in the development of new technologies is accompanied by socioeconomic analysis, and also, for instance, on initiatives fostering on social innovation. So in relation to this, I also wanted to tell you that it is important that at the European level, we do not work by ourselves. It's important that we work on areas where this is most prone, together with the member states and the member state actors in real partnerships, and that we try to pool resources all over the member states and not everybody working in their little niche, but really pulling the forces together and really playing on the strength of different member states in different areas and put this together with a European coordination. So there we will fund a really important partnership in the area. And without going into program details, I would like to call your attention to the candidate partnership Agriculture of Data proposed by the European Commission. This partnership will be essential to use potential Earth observation in combination with data technologies such as artificial intelligence to offer for the agricultural sector and policies what is needed. It will generate EU-wide data sets, knowledge and solutions. As data is key input to digital technologies, it will be supporting the agricultural sector to produce more efficiently and to increase its environmental and socio-economic performance to adapt to climate change. The data will also be relevant for policy monitoring and implementation, of course, not only in the field of agriculture, but also in the fields of environment and climate policies. Stakeholders and member states will be involved in the development and the implementation of the agenda of the partnership. Ideally, the whole EU territory will be covered by the work of the partnership and the data sets generated. Now, last but not least, the final point in my presentation is the new Digital Europe program that provides additional opportunities in the upcoming funding period. It will supplement Horizon Europe and focus, among others, on bringing innovation to the end user and to the market. In the field of agri-food, for instance, for the first work program, testing and experimentation facilities for artificial intelligence will be supported to boost the digital transformation of the agricultural sector. The testing and experimentation facilities should allow for greater efficiency and uniformity of testing, experimentation, and validation of AI-based solutions. The support will here be granted to large-scale world-class technology infrastructure. For the agricultural sector, such facilities could be formed, for instance, by trial farms or trial fields. Minister Klöckner mentioned this morning the test fields, so this is a bit of a similar concept. The supported activities should include measures for the exchange of experience, for instance, visits by experts. They should link also to the work of the digital innovation hubs, which will also be supported under the Digital Europe program. Digital innovation hubs in agri-food are and will be crucial to harvest the innovation potential of startups and SMEs to bring to the end users what is badly needed, such as farmers. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I could provide you an overview of actions supporting the sustainable digital transformation of the agriculture sector initiated at EU level. So research and innovation play an important role in boosting digitalization. However, for allowing all farmers to take up digital technologies and not only the ones that are already ahead and are leading this digital revolution, we have to make effective use of them. More than technical innovation is needed. We need to create really an environment enabling farmers to benefit from digitalization. So I'm looking forward to your questions and interesting exchanges during the conference. Thanks.
Thank you very much for giving us the European perspective. So we have the European perspective now, we have the general perspective, and one perspective that is very important for our conference is missing, and that is the legal perspective. And to give us a presentation and setting the scene for this area, it will be the task of Professor José Martinez. Professor Martinez is director of the Institute for Agricultural Law and director of the Department of International and Comparative Law at the Institute of Public Law of the George August University in Göttingen. He's visiting professor at the University of Nanjing in China and at the University of Santo Tomás of Bogotá in Colombia. So we have a very international perspective on the legal questions here. He is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board on Agricultural Policy, Food and Consumer Health Protection at the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture here in Germany, and he is Vice President of the German Society for Agricultural Law and Vice President of the European Council of Rural Law. So we are very much looking forward to your presentation, Professor Martinez. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I would like to share my So I hope it works. So does it work? Yes. Hope so. Well, dear participants, now you will listen to a lecture by a lawyer. When lawyers lecture, there is usually a dark, serious momentum in which the joyous, lively creativity and innovation of the empirical sciences ends abruptly. Lawyers do not talk about possibilities, chances, and options, but about limits, prohibitions, and difficulties. Indeed, terms in the title of my lecture, such as guidelines or framework, sound like a corset that is intended to limit this young plant of digitalization in its development and unfolding. After all, the law is a rigid tool. These sober considerations alone make it clear that the concept of governance must not be confined to a mere legal approach. Neither should we limit our perspective to a mere legal instruments for regulating the social and economic relations between the actors in digital agriculture. I start my presentation with three premises, with which you will certainly agree. First, digitalization takes already place. Digitalization is based on developed governance structures, and digitalization is a dynamic process. Let us start with the first premise. Digitalization is not a plant seed that just germinates. Digitalization is a young plant, a social, not a governmental phenomenon, which has already gone through the typical three development stages characteristic for innovative technology. These technologies have been developed in and by society. We usually speak of inventions. They are currently being made ready for application. We usually speak of innovation. In principle, they prove to be marketable. We usually speak of diffusion. Digitalization is based on a developed data governance system. Data governance encompasses all the conditions and regulations that determine the generation, storage, the analysis, and the use of data. Data governance includes legal and administrative instructions, economic commitments, ethical codes, and technical standards. You can see the already existing system of data governance in this diagram. On this basis, we can make the following observations. The system has so far been essentially characterized by self-regulation. The markets have established economic rules, particularly on use of data and standardization. In addition, ethical rules have been developed by the market. The member states and the European Union have not yet adopted any legal rules for the specific area of agricultural data. The existing legal rules do not specifically deal with agriculture, but they are general rules to which operators are bound like other citizens. The European Union and the member states have so far respected the existing basic governance structure and have only influenced the existing governance system through external incentives. In the context of this conference, we want to examine whether the existing system is sufficient to address arising challenges or whether it needs further development. For this purpose, we should take into account the following considerations. Digitalization is an ongoing process. Digitalization is not a fully grown plant. We do not have a ready-made development that would allow us to give a final and comprehensive assessment of whether digital agriculture is already adequately regulated. Further technical and economic development cannot exactly be predicted. As a result, we cannot determine precisely whether and how the rules we are using to change current governance will impact on tomorrow's digital agriculture. So we are thinking about a governance system based on uncertainty. There is also the following particularity. Any change to the existing structure must not hinder development in the three areas of invention, of innovation, and on diffusion. Therefore, we must be clear about one thing. We are indeed in the third stage of technological innovation. This is the stage of diffusion. It means of technologies penetration of the free market. But this does not mean that the first two stages, it means the invention and the innovation, have already been completed. As a matter of principle, in a free market economy, the state only becomes active once a technology like the smart farming has reached the third stage. The state, therefore, only becomes active when products are placed on the market. When the state regulates governance, it aims to create legal certainty for everyone. That means it wants to guarantee certainty in terms of behavior and expectations, and thus also to reduce fear of uncertain future developments. The state wants to ward off and take precautions against dangers. That means it does not only want to be a guarantor of default in the event of undesirable developments. However, such precautionary thinking can inhibit and even stop the ongoing invention and innovation. Thus, the challenge for precautionary law is to presume the regulation of the new before it is even known or has even become reality. Therefore, in order to decide as to whether the state shall autonomously change an existing governance system or provide incentives for change, we must first answer the question of whether action is imperative or and how it must be taken. The following three questions help to answer the question of whether the state should act at all. First question is, which socially desirable outcomes are linked to the technology? How great is the need to ensure that the desired effects are achieved? We ask for the commitment. Who is responsible for changing the governance structure? The first question inquires into what society expects from digital farming and whether expectations are being met. Here we have to differentiate between society's expectations, which are already defined by law, and those expectations of society, which have to be determined on an empirical basis. Contemporary law clearly documents society's expectations when faced with a new technology. Society's first priority is compliance with constitutional law. Digital farming must respect fundamental rights. These include the fundamental right to data protection as it is laid down in the constitutions of the member states and the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. As far as agricultural data are concerned, we have to note that society's standard expectations with regard to data protection have so far been limited exclusively to personal data. Operating data or non-personal data are not covered by the fundamental right to data protection. Another area of constitutionally standardized expectations of society is the intellectual property rights. Intellectual property is a category of property that includes intangible creations of the human intellect. This includes data that are obtained on the basis of an analytical evaluation of basic data. For example, the amount of plant protection products required is a result of an analysis of various basic data such as plant species, soil quality, precipitation, wind, and temperature. Thus, the result of the analysis must be legally protected. However, the basic data itself are not protected as intellectual property. Neither are the basic data protected by property right. The protection of the use of basic operational data is therefore not yet fixed in a normative manner, and the state is not obliged to protect it. Still, other constitutional values, which in return reflect societal expectations, must be legally taken into account. This includes, for example, public safety. Governance structures must therefore contain regulations on cybersecurity. Constitutional values also includes the maintenance of perfect competition, as this is an absolute prerequisite for a free market economy. The governance system must therefore also contain antitrust rules to combat anti-competitive conduct. For this reason, the market's distortion is structurally engraved in the relationship, in the relationship between farmers and agricultural machinery companies and platform operators or software providers. Where there is no constitutional basis for societal expectations on digital agriculture, empirical science or policymakers need to define these expectations. This includes, in part, the following question. Should access to digital agriculture be promoted by, for example, financial incentives? Should science be promoted by free access to data? Should agriculture become more ecological by passing on the data to environmental authorities? Should small and medium-sized farms be protected by special regulations? Should access to the technologies and data be opened up to farmers in the global south? The answers to these questions are not legally determined, but are determined solely by social or political considerations. Once we have answered the question of which unfulfilled societal or political expectations require a modification of the governance system, the question arises whether the new governance arrangements should be included in the statutory regulation or left to contractual agreements, or could be covered by legally non-binding forms of self-regulation. Insofar, only constitutional law imposes an obligation to make statutory provisions. Same applies to any regulation that provides for the protection of fundamental rights, or to any regulation that embodies a constitutional value, be it cybersecurity, the protection of a perfect competition, or the maintenance of agricultural structures or food security. However, whether the regulation on the use of farmer data should be included in the law or is left to self-regulation is within the discretion of those responsible. This also applies to questions of liability in the use of data. Thus, in many fields, a legal regulation is necessarily required. Binding force can also be achieved by non-legislative instruments. It will even have to be said, in a free market economy, effectiveness, efficiency, acceptance, or implementability with priority should be achieved through non-legislative instruments. Self-regulation by the market is the form of contractual agreements in particular, must therefore be the rule. This can be rights of use, standardization, or balancing of interests in liability. In such a scenario, the role of the member states and the European Union is reduced to protecting the framework for self-regulation. Governance research speaks of a shadow of hierarchy. The main framework condition is the existence of a healthy competition. Only in the exceptional cases where fundamental rights are affected or constitutional values such as public security are concerned, the European Union or member states are obliged to adopt binding legal regulations. In summary, it can be said that the governance system of digital agriculture is to a large extent characterized by self-regulation. The state only needs to change governance structures if fundamental rights or constitutional values are threatened. However, the state can also change these structures if the system of self-regulation fails by not sufficiently addressing societal expectations. It is conceivable, for example, that the state could realize farmers' expectations of using their data as property and create a new right to agricultural data ownership. However, any change in the governance structure must be examined to see whether it is innovation-friendly. A government action is innovation-friendly if it preserves the existing leeway for market participants to the greatest extent possible. Therefore, networked regulations should take precedence over hierarchical approaches. In particular, the state should be aware of how efficient alternative forms of regulations are. This includes pre-designing models for self-regulation, for example, contract-based models, but also behavioral incentives, like certification systems. We also have to remember again that the state is involved in a dynamic system whose development it cannot predict. The state is therefore also unable to specify the legal consequences of its regulation precisely. Therefore, any changes to the system obtained must be regularly evaluated. To reduce uncertainties, the state is obliged to involve all scientific disciplines concerned in the development of governance regulations. Finally, existing experiences from other governance systems should be used to further reduce the existing uncertainties. So it's wonderful to see that the program of our conference will enable us to respond to all these challenges. In this way, it will be possible, it's possible to further develop a dynamic governance framework that does not inhibit the creative power of society, but rather promotes the invention, the innovation, and the diffusion of digital agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Martinez, for this legal insight, giving us the third important perspective we were looking for. Now, I would like, first of all, to thank all three of you for your presentations, but now we have roughly 15 minutes left to answer questions that came in from the audience. And a number of questions came here on my screen on my left. And I would like to start with a question that goes to Peter Feind. And the question is, how can it be possible for small farmers to use modern and expensive digital techniques? Are contractors or government subsidies the only solution to these questions?
Sorry, I just had a hiccup in my internet connection. Can you briefly repeat the question? Sorry.
The question is, how can it be possible for small farms to use modern and expensive digital techniques? Are contractors or government subsidies the only solutions?
Yeah, oh, that is a very good question. So first of all, I think we need to look at the market relations. So and whether there are applications on the market or being developed that are useful for those small farms. And here I think, well, we shouldn't just think about small farms as one big categories, because I think it will really depend on the type of farming, the specific location, the type of activities, whether this is whether they produce a product with high added value. I think all of this will really influence the decision. So this would look very different for a strawberry producer than for a small farmer who provides kind of arable crops. And then the second question is, what would be the general principle based on which we would justify the payment of subsidies for the purchase of a product or service that is meant to be an input into the production of marketable products? So the only reasoning here would be that there will be some structural interest or an overriding public interest. And at the moment, I would find it relatively difficult to construct this. What I could imagine are programs that provide support and advice services. We could also think about open platforms that would offer these services as a kind of public service or as a club good. But then the question is whether these models would be competitive and whether they would be seen as superior by the relevant farmers. So I think the key question here would be whether there will be solutions available that make economic sense for different types of farms, and that question has to be answered individually, I think, by every farm operation.
Thank you very much for your answer. The second question goes to Kerstin Rosenow. And the question is, where do you see Europe's role in setting standards for data interoperability? The concern is that otherwise valorization and business models might be difficult. And after Kerstin Rosenow gave her answer, I would also like to ask Jose Martinez to add his thoughts to this question.
Thanks for this question. Maybe I can do a little loop to the first question, if I may, because I think there were some important elements. So I'm not sure if the question is always the price. So there are many tailored solutions for small farms which are not necessarily costly. That would be my first remark. And there is a lot of let's say things on offer which public research generates specifically. There's also the human capacity building aspect, which is particularly relevant for small farms. So it might not always be technologies, but it's really skills and training you have to invest in there most relevantly. And then also for advice. And there's free public data, and there's also apps and all kinds of things on the market available. So I'm sure there's a lot we can do. Now to the question that was posed to me, I think we have announced to work with stakeholders and member states on this question, especially in the data strategy. So this is really important because there our role in there, that was the main question, is really a facilitator. So we have to bring this together and we have to see how we can address this from the different angles. So we have no normative power as such here, but really the role is that we have to bring the different parts and the different partners together to make sure we streamline this as much as possible.
Thank you. Professor Martinez, would you like to add something?
To be honest, would you like to be so honest, so kind to repeat the question? I had internet problems.
Where do you see Europe's role in setting standards for data interoperability? The concern is that otherwise valorization and business models might not be work.
Well, the role of the European Union must be a subsidiary role, which has to await necessarily the development of the market, and for this reason, I would like to warn and to be careful to set in this moment such a binding standards and limit in this way the development of the and digitalized technologies in this area. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So the next questions goes again to Kerstin Rosenow. Will the coming European Data Act address the governance challenges of data sharing in agriculture? And I think this is also a question where Jose Martinez could give us his ideas. So Kerstin Rosenow, what is your answer to this question?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question. Yes, the Data Act will address this question. It is actually something which is not so easy in how to spell it out concurrently. And this is something that we currently work on. So it's difficult to say in what way, because there's quite, let's say, quite a number of differences to address this question at the moment. So I cannot give any data, any detailed question on how this is actually the case. But in the Horizontal Act, there will be also cross-sectoral answers to this. And this is really important. And it's currently also, we'll have a public consultation. So there will be a say on this.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez, do you have thoughts on this Data Act at the European level?
It's a classical example for the uncertainty we are suffering in this area. Well, because we do not exactly which direction this development will goes, and this is the problem we have. Finding here such a binding regulation.
Thank you. So the next question goes to Peter Feind. And the question is, if you are not paying for a product, you should ask yourself if you are the product. Are we running in problems not willing to pay for digital services?
Yeah, I think that was very nicely put by the questioner. I mean, that's something that we experience in other areas of life when we use the internet, that people basically pay with their data. Yeah. So if you use these services without financial payments, then usually everything you're doing on the interface is harvested for data purposes. Yeah, and so I think that's exactly the point. Yeah, you're becoming the product, or your behavior is being measured, is turned into data, and those data are fed into some larger data pools, which can then be used for the development of algorithms, for machine learning, etc. So I mean, one of the visions is, for example, that companies could observe the behaviors of farmers when farming their areas, their plots. You observe that, you link that to agronomic data, use machine learning, and then you would develop fantastic insights into the kind of agricultural practices that produce added value, and that would then be the product. And we know the same with how our data are harvested for advertisement marketing purposes, I mean, sending us election messages and whatever. Yeah, so the micro-targeting of audiences is enormous. So whenever we leave any data traces on the internet, we should be aware that these data are gold, and that gold is being turned into a product or a service somewhere else.
Thank you. The next question goes again to you. It is the transition to sustainable food systems implies behavioral change. How to harness the nudging power of digitalization for sustainability without limiting freedom?
Shall I start? But I think that could also be to my colleague, Professor Martinez. Well, the philosophy of the nudging approach is that you do not force people to take a specific course of action, but you give them the freedom to do so, but you give them small incentives or hints, so these small nudges, to steer them towards the desired behavior. Or you change the choice architecture in a way that the default choice, so the easy choice, is the one that is socially desired. So therefore, the argumentation from a nudging perspective is that there shouldn't be a contradiction between the nudging approach and individual freedom, because you are still free to take different courses of action and to behave differently. However, there's a very fine line, and there's also a very interesting legal argument here, whether nudges that are provided by public bodies should be transparent. Yeah? Or whether the government could, for example, harness nudging approaches behind the backs of the citizens. And I think many scholars would find that problematic. However, at the same time, then there's a discussion whether a transparent, obvious nudge is still as efficient as a hidden nudge. There, the evidence, I think, is a little bit mixed. However, in the area of public policy and the action of public bodies or governments, I think transparency is extremely important, and that's a matter of democracy, because otherwise the whole nudging approach would lose its legitimacy in a democratic, open society.
Shall I? Well,
thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes, well, I agree absolutely with Mr. Peter Feind, because there is no contradiction between the nudging approach and the freedom. A free decision of a person, of a human being, needs or a prerequisite of this free decision is that the person is informed, is well informed, and this person knows about the alternatives he has. And for this reason, nudging is one of the incentives the person suffer or has in a society, and it's not a limitation of this ability to choice between different alternatives.
If I may add one sentence, I mean, we are constantly nudged. So whenever we take a decision, that's not in a free space, but there is always what the nudging folks call a choice architecture. Yeah? So whenever you enter a supermarket, whenever you visit a website, the architecture of the place steers you towards certain behaviors. It steers our attention and our inclination for certain types of action. And so the nudging debate is only the attempt to harness these processes also for public purposes.
Thank you very much. And the last question goes to Kerstin Rosenow. Unfortunately, we don't have more time. We have more questions. We can't answer all of them. But this last one I would like to put to Kerstin Rosenow. And this is if in the CAP, digital aspects should be put more on the front and should be imperative in a way. At the moment, the concern of the person who is asking is that digitalization in the CAP reform is not a main topic. And the question is, should it be more important?
I mean, from our point of view, as I explained before, then setting it as a cross-cutting objective, which actually has a role to play in all the 9 specific objectives of the CAP, does exactly that. And I think what will be very important is that for the first time, the European Commission will issue a set of political recommendations to the member states to see what should be, let's say, most urgently addressed by the future CAP. And you will see that with regard to that, digitalization and all the different elements of it play a very important role, also in terms of analysis. So, because of course we have, I mean, things are moving so fastly, so we have to really look at what's currently happening. But the recommendations will also be built on an analysis, what is actually happening and what are the missing factors, what is outstanding. I mean, many of the factors that the enabling factors I've mentioned in my presentation, they will be assessed there. So I think, I mean, for me as a resume, because we had a hot debate for really many months, whether we should have only a specific objective or we should really make sure that the digital aspects are, whenever we talk about environmental, about soil management, there is a role, of course, and the faster the nutrients tool and the new digital things that will build this, they will really address this and be inbuilt. So for me, we have put digitalization in terms of key factor for modernization at the central stage. And as the role of the Commission will be analyzing also the CAP strategic plan and what member states are actually planning in this regard. So this, for me, this is, we have put it, let's say, at the right ambition. And maybe, if I may, I know we're already over time, but just 30 seconds to catch up, to make sure that I was sufficiently clear on the previous question. So, and the question whether in the acts, agriculture will play a special role. So this is still under debate. And what I was mentioning before was just to say that in the public consultation, reference can be made to this. Thanks.
Thank you all very much for all your contributions, the speakers, and also the participants in our discussion. I think we have really set the scene for the rest of the conference, and I thank you for this again. And now I hand back to Martin to continue with our conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Steffen Beerbaum. This has been quite an insightful morning, it seems. Okay, here we are. Now you can also see me. So thank you very much to Dr. Steffen Beerbaum and all our three experts. This has been quite an insightful morning, and thank you very much for sharing your perspective and expertise. And thank you to everyone in the audience who brought in their questions to our digital discussion answered. You can count on the team here that we are taking notice of your thoughts and your input. And now it's time for lunch break, and I would like to invite you to join the online networking opportunity we are offering during this break, but also during the other breaks throughout the conference. And by clicking on one of the meeting point buttons in the lower part of your screen, you can join and enter a digital discussion room and get in touch with each other, get to know each other better, and have a good lunch break with your fellow participants. So I would like to encourage you to make use of this great opportunity, and we will see each other again at 1:30 with the track 1 and track 2 afternoon program. And track 1 will focus on the sustainable digital transformation of the agricultural value chain, and track 2 will look at the governance framework for agricultural data. So you can easily then enter the tracks by clicking on the designated buttons in the lower part of your screen. And with that being said, I wish you a very good lunch break.